Welcome to the LOGSTAT, the Army's premier podcast on all things sustainment, where we analyze new developments, discuss current trends, and forge the path ahead for the next generation of sustainment soldiers. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the LOGSTAT. I'm your host, Captain Garett Pyle. On today's episode, we're going to be diving even further into data. I know we're continuing to have some good episodes when it's talking about data analytics. We know we looked at data in the sense of direct commissioning in the ASI. Now we're going to take it a step further and see how does data-driven sustainment, what does that look like in a contested environment? Especially after we know we've talked about contested logistics, we've talked about what that looks like and how it's defined. Now we're taking it even a step further on the data side of the house. And with me today to walk us through this, I have Captain Jonathan Vann, who just recently completed his training with industry with Deloitte Industries, who's going to provide some perspective on what he has recognized and seen when it comes to data-driven sustainment, both from industry as well as now applying to the Army side of the house. So Jonathan, if you could give us a quick introduction on yourself.
Greetings, Captain Pyle. Thank you for having me. My name is Captain Jonathan Vann. I've been in the Army 21 years prior service, made all the way up to E7. Then I commissioned via Green to Gold. Once I got done with Green to Gold and commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Transportation Corps, I was PCS to Fort Bragg, where I served as a platoon leader in the 82nd BSB, 3rd Brigade. Did a lot of staff time. Went to Triple C, graduate Triple C. Then I took command right here on Fort Lee. 2 commands, one with Charlie Company 16th OD Battalion, and then 59th OD HEC Brigade. And after command time, I did broadening, and I did training with industry, which was a phenomenal experience. Training with industry with Deloitte Corporation, which is a consulting firm where my main focus was data analytics and data analytics in the battlefield and Excel spreadsheets. So yes, and thank you for having me here.
Of course. Yeah. So excited to have you. Before we get into today's topic, when you were prior enlisted, what was your MOS?
I was actually 25 uniform, and that's a signal support specialist. So I was a commo guy. I was working in the S6. And back then, during the coin and GWAT era, if it plugged into the wall, I was expected to fix it. So 11 good years on the enlisted side as a signaleer. And then I decided to take the next step in my career, cross over, and I became a logistician.
So what made you want to become a logistician over a signal officer?
I saw a lot of, I worked a lot with, the STBs, where they were predominantly, 88 series and mechanics. And I did a lot of that. I worked with them when I was enlisted, and their job always seemed appealing. We were in Afghanistan, living a good life, and, being a mechanic and being a cook, the laundry specialist, their jobs were always appealing to me. It was hard. They were working just as hard as we signaleers were. And I was tired of being a signaleer because, signaleer, in my personal opinion, was going more towards the networking side, and I'm not a computer guy, So once I finally was in Green and Gold and I was a cadet, they gave me the opportunity to be a logistician. They said my credentials met that criteria. So I jumped on it and I became a logistician.
Okay. I find it funny you say I'm not a computer guy. Yeah. And then now we're about to dive into your experience.
Yes. Now I have I've learned a lot about computers the past year. Either way, the Army, you have to have some kind of computer savviness to you, especially as an officer, so I had no choice but to learn. But now I'm a lot more proficient and I'm a lot more confident.
Yeah, it found you.
Yes. Without choice. From it. Without absolutely.
So then, so I'm going to dive head first. Mm-hmm. This is, go up to the deep end. This is dive in head first on this concept for today of data-driven sustainment in a contested environment. So I kind of want to start on today is, what do you see is driving this change for the Army to, adopt a more agile warfare methodology that promotes what I said, like the data-driven sustainment in this contested environment?
In my personal opinion, I think the conflict in Ukraine was a big reason. If you look at the conflict in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine, Russia had a lot of issues because of logistical. with the logistics. Their logistical supply chain was constantly contested and it was destroyed. And pretty much the Russians, were not allowed to do what they were supposed to do just because they had a poor logistical plan. So, the Army reviewed, they had their eyes on that conflict, as we all know. And I feel like, the Army took that as a warning. Okay, so how do we not end up like that country in a conflict? We have to be more agile and we have to be more predictive and more precise, especially with our sustainment, because believe it or not, sustainment is what actually, wins wars. You're not going to win a war if you don't get your ammo. You're not going to win the war if you don't get your fuel. You're not going to win the war if you don't maintain adequate maintenance on your vehicles and on your fleet. So, my personal opinion, that was the driving force, one of the driving forces behind that, just past experiences. And, the Army always learns from previous, and, we definitely have to be more agile and we have to adopt, the data analytics, mindset, along with artificial intelligence.
Okay. So I know as we're, the new FM 4.0, we're getting more into predictive logistics, precision sustainment. I know that's a driving factor behind all that. So can you, for the audience, define that more for them?
Yeah. So predictive logistics is pretty much knowing when the resupply is coming. So if you have a unit out for X amount of time, okay, we already know from past data that we've already consumed, because that's the thing. We always have the data. You just got to apply the data sets now. Okay, we automatically know we can predict, when we can actually need that resupply. Whether it be class 1, class 3, class 9, we already know just by past data analytics that we did. And that leads into precision sustainment, because if we already know, that gives the leaders, the strategic leaders, the insight, for freedom of action. Okay, from the data analytics that we have put together, we know that, okay, we're going to need resupply at this point, at this time, on this date. So let's have a solution, and let's make sure that we get to, make the right decision and a precise decision, and get the actual supplies to that point, at that given moment. So predictive, the data analytics actually, it provides, it fulfills logistical gaps, and predictive logistics leads to precision sustainment. Because you know where the gaps are coming from, you're going to make the right decisions to fill those gaps. And the glue that holds both precision sustainment, predictive logistics and precision sustainment together is data analytics.
Okay. So it's the right quantity of supplies at the right place, at the right unit, at the right time, and it's getting there. It's getting a little bit past the old just-in-time logistics that we had prior to.
Yes. To sum it up, it allows you to be proactive instead of reactive, and that's something that we definitely need in modern day warfare. The Army and the new FM 4.0 is preaching modernization, and that analytics allows a lot of units and leaders to be proactive instead of reactive. So instead of making a decision after the damage has already been done, we already know when the decision needs to be made and what needs to happen, so we can be 2-3 steps ahead of the enemy or our adversary, make a decision and win the war, at least logistically.
Mm-hmm. So you said that the data analytics, that's the glue that holds this all together. Can you expand upon that more?
Yeah. So when I say it's like the glue, it's going to be the driving force. So predictive logistics does not occur if you have the right data analytics, and I've said it already, like as sustainers, we've always had the data, we just need to learn how to put it in data sets, algorithms, and we just need to put it in there, put it into a system, apply some artificial intelligence to it, and, allow for those for those logistical gaps to be displayed, on a battlefield simulation, which predictive logistics leads to, and we need all that, and that doesn't occur without proper data analytics, so you need to know, from previous, data sets, hey, we need to input this information into this, and we can actually project and see and give it like a scenario. Is it going to be a scenario? I saw this with the threat-based assessments with FCD, Future Command Directorate. They will actually put in the data. It will create a scenario, and okay, we already know this scenario predicts that logistical gaps will be at this location, this location, this location. Okay, as a leader, as a commander, I can provide a solution, or I can get that resupply at that point, at that point, at that point, and we can actually apply it to the actual, the war and the battlefield.
Okay. No, I definitely want to be coming back to that threat-based assessment here later in our conversation, because there's going to be a lot to dive into.
Yes.
With that, what do you see are some of the strengths and I would say maybe challenges of data analytics and AI?
Strengths, that's our strengths, but pretty much precise decision making. You quick, easy, and efficient. Is going to give leaders the ability to think and make decisions more efficiently. Why? Because you already know where the gaps are going to be at. That's where the prediction comes in, And if you already know where the gaps are going to be at, you can be more precise, i.e. precise sustainment, in your decision-making abilities. So it gives the leaders, the ability to think a lot faster and a lot more efficiently in their, when it comes to scenarios and filling logistical gaps in a contested environment, and it also increases and it also involves risk mitigation. There's a lot less risk that's going to be involved, if you actually know when something's going to happen, and that goes into being proactive. You already know when something's going to happen, so that mitigates the risk because you already have a solution to, for that risk, and it's also cost effective as well. A lot of times, especially in my time, when I was in Afghanistan, we would lose a vehicle, we would lose a lot of equipment, and we had to go through, the parameters of actually getting it fixed, and since we didn't know that was going to happen, it was very time consuming and, expensive, to get that piece of equipment fixed. Now with preventive maintenance, which predictive logistics give you, leaders know and can devise better solutions, and less costly solutions, for fixing that piece of equipment so we can get it back on the battlefield and win the war logistically.
Okay. So then, so we kind of went over more the strengths. We get even more into the challenges side of the house.
Yes, the challenges are definitely pretty much education, because, artificial intelligence, data analytics, it does, require, brain power, and I said earlier, I'm not really I was never a computer savvy guy, or a soldier. I kind of had to be, so we as an institution definitely needs to incorporate that into our professional development, whether it's NCO, with the NCO Academy, CCC, ILE, wherever you got to go. Data analytics, and artificial intelligence needs to be a big factor of the curriculum. And also we need to, instill data analytics into the strategic echelon of the Army, because we all know FM 4.0, we all know that, we're going to a more data-centric environment, and that starts at the top. It starts at strategic level, core, division, and it filters down all the way to the brigades, the battalions, and the companies, and it all starts from the top. So the strategic leaders at the strategic echelon actually needs to be the ones who have to buy into this data analytics. I don't think, in my personal opinion, they have a choice, but it definitely starts at the top and has to be factored in and fed through down to the bottom. And of course, to make things easier, we definitely have to get that a part of the curriculum, and NCOESs, CCC, ILE, and so on.
Okay. Now, I know you've been using the term, of course, data analytics. We've been talking about it since the beginning of this conversation. That is in case for someone out there that hear that is like, can you fully explain how you see the word data analytics, like what that really means when you say that term?
Okay, so data analytics. I'm in Poland. We're on the battlefield. We know that we have a mission going out, and we know that they only going to have so much class 1 or class 3. We know that. So we have data, we have data logs, data sets, which is in some kind of computer somewhere. Okay. The history of these data sets says that after 8 hours or 9 hours, we are going to be black on class 1 or class 3. So we put that in the data set or in a logarithm. I might be saying that wrong, excuse me, but we put that in a logarithm, and we put it into a scenario, and okay, we know right now just by past data, and analyzing that data, that at 8 hours into the mission, that unit will be black on class 1 and class 3, which is, water and fuel. So if we know that, we can better, create a plan or a solution, or make, a precise sustainment decision. And okay, I want everybody and all that class 1 and class 3 ready for resupply at least, T+6, because 8 hours. So T+6, have everything ready to go, get it out there. And once they go black, we're not waiting around, for the resupply to actually occur. They already are there and they can resupply right then and there, and, it pretty much gives whoever that commander is, it makes them make more effective and efficient decisions on that. And that's where it comes to the data, because past data, actually will show that, hey, at this time, at this date, usually after a certain period of time, they actually go black on a certain resupply. So that data will allow us to make better decisions, get that resupply out there ahead of time. So we don't have a unit out there black on any kind of supply.
Yeah, because people hear we keep using the word data all the time. Like we've talked a lot about on this podcast before. It's just really at the core, as you're talking about. It's taking all this data, because you said we've had data for forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just actually taking that data, understanding it, and applying it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if not, it's wasted.
Yes.
So that's where the analytics becomes part of it, where someone can go in, work through that data, make it readable, understandable, so then they can actually use it for something, to apply to something.
Yes. And that's where, that's what pretty much I've been doing for, a year in the training industry. But we definitely going to need those people who know what they're doing. And that's where it comes to, the strengths, or the challenges, actually getting these leaders. I know the Army is slowly, transitioning over to specific data analytic jobs, where they actually go to school and training to be a data an analyst, for a specific unit, so those soldiers are actually going to be the ones, they can cross-train with, a 9-1 Bravo or whatever MOS, and this is how we're going to do it, because that is going to be the driving force. So, they need to, take those data sets and apply them appropriately. But first, they need to know what they're doing. They need to know how to do it, and they need to start teaching it to everybody around them, because data analytics will be, the future.
Okay. So we talked to the strengths, we talked to the challenges. So how do you foresee us overcoming some of these challenges that you've identified?
Keep an open mind, keep an open mind, and, be receptive, and know that over time, there's always going to be change. For years, I came in 2005, GWAT, Global War on Terrorism, and it was a coin-based, ideology of war fighting, counterinsurgency. That's no longer the case. Now we're in a large-scale combat operations, environment where they're no longer deploying brigades. They're actually deploying, divisions, sometimes corps, depending on the conflict, So you need to be receptive of change and be adaptive. You have to be adaptive and be versatile. That's part about being a good leader. Especially been as long, as I have 21 years. You have to have an adaptive mind and just know that, hey, change is going to occur, and you need to be definitely receptive of that change. Data analytics, artificial intelligence is not going anywhere. It's on our computers. I'm pretty sure when it comes to certain things, people are pulling up the ChatGPT and using that to write whatever, So you have to embrace it, And quite frankly, we're not the only ones doing it. We actually, the whole world is transitioning, and we, as the grading founding force in this whole world, need to be at least 2 steps ahead of everybody. So you just need to keep an open mind and be adaptive and embrace the change that will occur.
So then, how have you personally seen all this play out? I know you talked about your experience with Deloitte.
Very well. Like me personally, I have seen scenarios of battlefield simulations where, on a big old screen, where they can already predict when a logistical gap is going to be, whether it's class 1, class 3, or, class 5, class 9, and they can predict, days ahead of time, not just hours, days ahead of time, when that resupply will be needed. It was with Deloitte, and also I did a demonstration with FCD, the Future Command Directorate here in Fort Lee, where they did a lot of threat-based assessments, where they actually showed me scenarios where they just type in a scenario, and it will project and give a prediction of when that resupply will be needed of all classes, of all the classes. So I've seen it play out, and me, at my level, thinks that this is definitely beneficial. It's definitely beneficial, and it's definitely, going to work. So we just have to be receptive. We have to have buy-in, because this is the future. Data analytics will be the driving force of, the armed forces in the foreseeable future. And we just need to adapt and overcome and embrace it, because it's definitely effective, if you apply it the right way.
Okay. And then I know this all ties into what you were referring to earlier in our conversation. I'll make sure I get this right. The threat-based assessment, TBA. So can you kind of walk us through that, your experience with that more, and just really what that brings to our capabilities?
The capabilities, so it is a driving force for what we talked about and what's in FM 4.0. Predictive logistics and precision sustainment. It already will project various scenarios where, using past data analytics, where resupplies will happen. So in that, there's a prediction, so you can predict, okay, from past analytics and the data that you've already put into the system. Now, of course, you need to put into the system, it's not going to come out of nowhere. You need that human element to put inside the system. But they put the data analytics into that system. Okay, we already know we're going to need a resupply at such and such time. Okay. From that, okay, whoever that leader is, that strategic leader can actually, make an efficient decision, a righteous decision, and know, and say, hey, we will have, a resupply at that point. So it's coming from the top, goes all the way down, make it happen one way or the other. And I actually saw that on the scenario. It's TBA, it's a big screen, it's a big screen where they can predict, and all you got to do is just put in a scenario, so that scenario is the prediction right there, and those scenarios that they actually put in is based off of past data, data. I mean, this whole year, I've never really, understood how data really is a driving force for a lot of things. I've been to 3 JRTCs, I've been deployed, but all the AARs and the after action reviews from the JRTCs, the NTCs, all of the training that's done overseas is actually put into data sets. So I've actually seen them, especially in the TBA, pull data from JRTC such and such date, and this is what this unit reported. This is what happened at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and create a scenario from that. So that goes, that's all past data, historical data, and I was amazed. I was like, wow, because, 3 JRTCs, I was usually in the box just, trying to survive, and, I was like, wow, all that data that we put in, all of those actual reviews, all of the, turmoil and the trepidation that we went through, was actually put into a data set that can actually be used to help out units in the future, So that TBA derived a lot of its data from those events, JRTC, NTC, and it can create scenarios, and those scenarios is a prediction, is a predictor, and from that you can be more precise with your decision making.
Okay, so then what kind of recommendations do you have for the sustainment community then to maximize our potential with all this?
The biggest recommendation, and I kind of hinted at it earlier, is keep an even keel when it comes to artificial intelligence and data analytics and the human element. We all know, you see it on the news, FM 4.0 says it, data analytics is going to be a driving force. But still, you're going to need that human element to actually input the data, So you need good, even, augmentation and aggregation of both data analytics and that human element, because data analytics is not going to go anywhere without that human element, and that's where you still going to need your leaders. You're still going to need your experts, your education, I mean, LPDs need to be, data centric, because the data's there, but there still needs to be somebody who puts it into the system, and that's where we humans come in, I mean, us leaders, so leaders, in the future, yes, AI is going to be a driving force, but don't forget about the human element in that, because the human element are going to be the ones who put those data analytics into the system. Yes, it's self-serving. This isn't going to be what you see in the movies and whatnot. Where artificial intelligence is taking over, because guess what? We still need that human element to control it. We still need that human element to actually input the information and make sure the artificial intelligence and the data analytics is doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Okay. So I know we went a lot through data.
Mm-hmm.
As we talk about, it's the buzzword right now. Is there anything that we missed from today's conversation that you want to dive anything more into when it comes to anything with data-driven sustainment in a contested environment?
Yes, there is one thing, cybersecurity. That's going to be critical, and that's definitely, I forgot to mention it earlier, it's going to be a challenge because, with data analytics, you need some kind of cyber security element, a part of that. You see it all the time in Hollywood, but, cyber attacks, that is a reality, and the more we actually buy in and implement these data analytics and the artificial intelligence scenarios and these battlefield simulations, the more important cybersecurity is going to be critical, and keeping the enemy, from seeing what we're actually doing. So when it comes to data analytics, it comes high cybersecurity, element that you need to apply towards your data analytics. And that needs to be involved in the curriculum because, in order to protect and prevent the enemy from seeing what we're doing, we need, efficient and precise cyber security element. Yes.
No, so well, yeah, it was always good because that's something that can get overlooked sometimes.
Yes, most definitely.
And when we overlook it, bad things happen.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And we definitely need to, be cognizant of it in all future training. Most definitely.
So I just want to really appreciate, you coming and sitting down with me today, going over this concept of data-driven sustainment because as you talked about, it's not going away. We're going to continue to have more and more data. We don't want to overload ourselves with data. That's why it gets back to the concept as we were discussing data analytics to be able to, take this data, understand the data so we can actually do something with it. And on that, is there any good advice, 21 years experience, being able to go from green to gold that you have for the sustainment community today?
Adapt and overcome. There's going to be constant change. I've been in 21 years and a lot of change has occurred since May 2005 when I enlisted, so the change ain't going to stop. As a leader, you need to be very versatile and embrace the change and enforce the change and expect more of it in the future. So just adapt and overcome and everything will be all right.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that because I know you just, as you said, 21 years experience, you got to see and do a lot.
Yes, definitely.
And on that, and where can people come and send you cards and letters, if they want to reach out to you, having you, experience a lot of this data from your TWI experience, where can they reach out to you?
They can reach out to me on my global, which are jonathanjvan.mil@army.mil. There's only one in the Army, so any questions or any feedback or anything that you want to send to me, just send me to my global and I'll get to it ASAP.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for taking the time to come down and sit with me today and kind of analyzing this for the audience.
Thank you, Garrett. I appreciate everything. Thank you.
Of course. So there you have it, folks. We went through and got a good understanding of what data-driven sustainment is going to look like in a contested environment, as well as how we get through when it comes to just really data analytics overall. Some of the strengths, some of the challenges, and just seeing firsthand how this has been implemented across the board. But as we move forward, I know I keep hyping on it, but data is not going away. It's gonna be there. We're gonna keep getting more and more data. I mean, we've had it throughout our entire history. It's just now we're getting more systems to help us interpret that data so we can utilize that data on the battlefield. If you have any questions, reach out to those who are very involved in data, like our guest today. I know we're talking a lot. We've had a lot of episodes when it comes to data, really on, today, data-driven sustainment and what that looks like as we're in more of a contested environment now when it deals with large-scale combat operations. So on that note, continue to, dive into the regulations, see what the FM 4.0, talks about. That's your foundation for that understanding. Start there, reach out to those who are, very much into the data so that we can continue to understand it because it's not going away anywhere. We've always had data. It's just now we're just getting more and more data. So just find better ways to interpret that data so we can utilize it on the battlefield. But that is all we have today, folks. As always, Sustainable Leaders start here. See you next time. Thank you for listening to another episode of the LOGSTAT. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Please share this episode across your formation and leave us a review. If you have a topic you'd like here discussed, then please reach out to us at armysustainment@army.mil or directly to me on Global at garett.h.pyle. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the U.S. Army CASCOM page. We'll see you next time. Sustainment leaders, start here.